The front door slammed so hard the pictures on the hallway wall rattled. "I need some air, Mark. Don't follow me," I shouted loud enough for the neighbors across the street to hear. I stormed toward my SUV, threw my purse onto the passenger seat, and peeled away from the curb. Except I never really left. I circled the block once, parked in the shadows behind a row of tall maple trees at the end of our cul-de-sac, shut off the engine, and waited. 30 seconds later, I quietly slipped back into the house through the garage door. I had purposely left unlocked. Every heartbeat echoed inside my chest. I climbed the stairs without making a sound and entered the guest bedroom. The tiny baby monitor receiver sat on the dresser. We had bought it 16 years earlier when our daughter, Olivia, refused to sleep alone. We had never thrown it away. Recently, Olivia had struggled with anxiety before exams, so we occasionally used it again. Whenever she wanted the bedroom, door closed but still needed to know we were nearby. Tonight, it was about to reveal something far different. I switched the receiver on. Static hissed softly. Then footsteps. Mark walked into the living room downstairs. A chair scraped across hardwood. The monitor crackled. Then I heard his voice. Quiet, comfortable, almost relieved. "Yeah, she's gone." A pause. Then words that shattered 18 years of marriage. Finally, another pause. I can't keep pretending anymore. Every muscle in my body locked. Then he laughed. Not nervous. Not guilty. Happy. "Rachel, I miss you already." The receiver nearly slipped from my hands. For several seconds, I couldn't even breathe. "My name is Sarah Collins. I was 42 years old the night I discovered my husband had already emotionally left our marriage long before he planned to leave our house. Looking back now, I realized that conversation didn't destroy my marriage. It simply exposed that it had already been falling apart for a very long time. That Friday had begun like hundreds before it. October sunlight spilled through our kitchen windows while pancakes browned on the griddle. Fresh coffee filled the room. The smell normally made me feel safe. Instead, it reminded me how long I had been trying to convince myself everything was normal. Mark sat at the kitchen island scrolling through emails. "Smells amazing," he mumbled without looking up. The same automatic compliment. The same distracted voice. Upstairs, Olivia rushed around getting ready for volleyball practice. At 16, she was smart, funny, stubborn, and somehow already taller than I was. She grabbed an apple instead of breakfast. "Love you, Mom." "Love you too." She kissed my cheek before disappearing upstairs again. The front door closed. Silence returned. Mark never looked up from his phone. I placed his breakfast in front of him anyway. "We should probably RSVP for the alumni reunion next weekend." He nodded. "Rachel's helping organize it." The name barely registered at first. Rachel Morgan, his college girlfriend. The woman everyone once assumed he would marry. "Oh," I answered carefully. "I didn't realize she was involved." "Yeah." He smiled. A real smile. "She reached out a few weeks ago." Something inside me tightened. Not because he mentioned another woman, because it was the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in months. When Mark and I met 20 years earlier, he had been impossible not to notice. Funny, confident, kind. The type of man who made everyone around him feel important. I was finishing graduate school. He had just accepted his first management position. Neither of us had much money, but we had dreams. Tiny apartments, secondhand furniture, pizza dinners on the living room floor because we couldn't afford a dining table. Back then, we laughed constantly. When Olivia was born 3 years later, life became harder but happier. Late-night feedings, doctor appointments, preschool tuition, soccer games, homework, college savings, normal life, messy, beautiful, exhausting. Somewhere along the way, without either of us noticing, marriage slowly transformed into project management. Bills, schedules, laundry, parent-teacher conferences, mortgage payments, everything necessary. Very little joyful. I blamed adulthood. He blamed stress. Neither of us blamed the distance quietly growing between us. I worked as a substitute teacher for the local high school. The flexible schedule allowed me to be available whenever Olivia needed me. Mark's career exploded. Promotions, bonuses, longer hours, business travel, new responsibilities. I told everyone how proud I was, and I truly was, but every promotion seemed to take another small piece of him away. Dinner conversations became shorter. Weekend plans disappeared. Phone calls during vacations increased. Then came something harder to explain. His attention. He was physically home. Emotionally, somewhere else. One evening while folding laundry, I asked casually, "Are we okay?" He looked genuinely confused. "What do you mean?" "I don't know." I folded another towel. "It feels like we're roommates." He laughed softly. "Sarah, we're just busy." Busy, such an innocent word. It became the explanation for everything. Why he stopped holding my hand. Busy, why he checked emails during dinner. Busy, why he barely looked at me anymore. Busy. I accepted that answer for months, because sometimes believing a simple, life feels much easier than questioning someone you love. 3 days before the reunion, my best friend Lisa invited me to coffee. She watched me stir my latte far longer than necessary. "You've been quiet lately." "I'm fine." She smiled gently. "No. You've been pretending." That sentence lingered long after we left the cafe. Because she wasn't wrong. I had become incredibly skilled at pretending. Pretending everything was normal. Pretending distance was temporary. Pretending marriages naturally became emotionally empty after enough years. Deep down, I knew something had changed. I simply wasn't ready to discover what. The reunion arrived on a chilly Saturday evening. The ballroom overflowed with familiar faces wearing unfamiliar wrinkles. Everyone looked older, hopefully wiser. Mark looked happier than I had seen him in nearly a year. Then Rachel walked through the entrance. She was beautiful, elegant, confident, freshly divorced. The room seemed to disappear around them. "Mark!" She smiled. He crossed the room before I even realized he had moved. Their hug lasted just a little too long. Not inappropriate. Not obvious. Just comfortable, like two people reconnecting after years apart. When they pulled away, they kept smiling at each other. That smile never reached me. Rachel greeted me politely. She was kind, warm, perfectly respectful, which somehow made everything worse. Throughout the evening, I watched them drift back toward each other again and again, laughing, remembering college stories, finishing each other's sentences. Mark looked alive. I couldn't remember the last time he looked at me that way. Driving home later, I finally asked, "You two seem to have a lot to catch up on." He shrugged. "Just old memories. Nothing more." But something told me old memories had suddenly become very new again. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while Mark slept peacefully beside me. Outside, autumn rain tapped softly against the windows. Inside, a question refused to leave my mind. What happens when your husband starts smiling more for someone from his past than for the woman who built his future? The reunion should have ended that night. Instead, it followed us home. For the next several days, Mark seemed lighter. He whistled while shaving. He spent extra time choosing his clothes before work. He smiled at his phone when he thought nobody was watching. Little things, the kind of details that don't prove anything by themselves. But together, they painted a picture I desperately didn't want to see. I tried convincing myself I was imagining it. After all, 18 years of marriage couldn't be shaken by one reunion. Could they? Life continued. At least on the surface. Every morning I packed Olivia's lunch. Every afternoon I taught classes at the high school. Every evening I made dinner. The routine stayed exactly the same. Only I had changed. Now I noticed everything. Mark never left his phone on the kitchen counter anymore. He carried it into the bathroom, into the garage, even outside to take out the trash. Whenever it buzzed, he smiled before checking the screen. Then his expression immediately became serious if I happened to be nearby. It happened too often to ignore. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, I was folding laundry upstairs when I heard him talking outside on the back patio. The sliding door wasn't completely closed. His voice floated inside with the cold autumn breeze. "No." A quiet laugh. "I've been thinking about that too." Silence, then another laugh. A real one. Warm, carefree. The kind of laugh I hadn't heard from him in months. By the time I reached the patio door, the conversation had ended. He slipped his phone into his pocket. "Client?" I asked. He nodded immediately. "Yeah." Something about how quickly he answered made my stomach tighten. That Friday, Lisa invited me for coffee again. She studied my face before speaking. "You look exhausted." "I haven't been sleeping." Because of Mark? I stared into my coffee. I don't know anymore. She waited. Good friends know when silence speaks louder than advice. Finally, I admitted it. I think there's someone else. Lisa didn't act surprised. Instead, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Do you have proof? I slowly shook my head. No. Then don't accuse him. She looked directly into my eyes. But don't ignore your instincts either. The following week brought another strange moment. Mark came home later than usual. He smelled different. Not dramatically. Just a faint floral perfume that definitely wasn't mine. I noticed it the moment he kissed my cheek. You okay? He asked. Long day? I forced a smile. Just tired. He disappeared upstairs before I could ask anything else. That night, while putting one of his dress shirts into the laundry basket, I smelled the same perfume again. It lingered faintly on the collar. My hands froze. Perfume can transfer for innocent reasons. Crowded elevators, business meetings, restaurants. I knew all of that. Still, something inside me whispered that this wasn't innocent. Olivia noticed the tension too. One evening, she wandered into the kitchen while I chopped vegetables. Mom? I looked up. Are you and Dad fighting? The knife stopped moving. No, not exactly. She leaned against the counter. He acts weird lately. My heart sank. Even she could feel it. I brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. Adults go through stressful seasons. She looked unconvinced. I just don't want our family to change. Neither did I. More than anything, neither did I. 3 nights later, everything became worse. Mark had fallen asleep on the couch after another late dinner. His phone buzzed. Just once, the screen lit up. I wasn't trying to spy. Honestly, I wasn't. But the notification appeared before I could look away. Can't stop thinking about last night. No name. Only the message. My pulse exploded. I stood frozen. The phone went dark again. I didn't touch it. I didn't unlock it. I simply walked away. But the damage had already been done. The next morning, he acted completely normal. He kissed my forehead, asked about Olivia's volleyball tournament, complimented breakfast. Every word sounded rehearsed. Every smile looked practiced. I kept wondering, how long had this been happening? Weeks? Months? Longer? That afternoon, I drove to the park where we'd spent countless weekends when Olivia was little. Children laughed on the playground. Parents pushed swings. Dogs chased tennis balls. Everything looked painfully ordinary. I sat alone on a weathered bench watching leaves fall around me. A memory suddenly surfaced. Years earlier, Mark had surprised me there with coffee after one particularly difficult week. He had wrapped his arm around my shoulders and whispered, "No matter what happens, we'll always choose each other." Back then, I believed him completely. Now I wondered if he even remembered saying those words. When I got home, I found Mark humming while cooking pasta. He almost never cooked. Thought I'd help tonight. He smiled. The gesture should have made me happy. Instead, it frightened me. People often become unusually kind when guilt begins catching up with them. Dinner was pleasant. Almost too pleasant. Olivia laughed. Mark joked. For 2 hours, we looked like the perfect suburban family again. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, smiled without realizing, and quickly locked the screen. One tiny smile. That was all it took. The illusion disappeared again. Later that night, I stood alone in our bedroom, looking at the old baby monitor, sitting inside the closet. We hadn't used it much recently. Olivia was nearly grown. Still, I found myself holding it, testing the batteries, checking the range. I wasn't entirely sure why. Maybe part of me already knew. Maybe my instincts were quietly preparing for something my heart still refused to believe. I placed the receiver inside the guest room drawer, closed it, and whispered to myself, "Please let me be wrong." But deep down, for the first time, I no longer believed I was. The silence after Mark moved out was almost louder than our arguments had ever been. For the first week, I kept expecting to hear his truck pull into the driveway every evening. My eyes would automatically drift toward the front window around 6 o'clock, only to meet an empty street washed in the orange glow of autumn sunsets. It amazed me how quickly the mind clung to habits, even after the heart knew everything had changed. Emma struggled more than she admitted. She smiled during dinner, joked about school, and insisted she was fine. But late one night, I walked past her bedroom and noticed the light still on. Her laptop sat untouched while she stared out the window. "Can't sleep?" I asked quietly. She shrugged. "I keep wondering if I could have done something." The words broke something inside me. I crossed the room and sat beside her. "Honey, none of this is because of you. But maybe if I wasn't always anxious, if Dad didn't feel trapped." I gently lifted her chin. "Your father made his own choices. Adults are responsible for their own decisions. Never carry someone else's mistakes on your shoulders." She burst into tears. I held her until she finally fell asleep against me, just like when she was little. The following Monday, I met with my attorney for the first time. Her office overlooked downtown Chicago, gray skyscrapers disappearing into low October clouds. Her name was Diane Foster. She wasn't dramatic. She didn't promise revenge. She simply listened. When I finished telling the entire story, including the baby monitor, she folded her hands. "Sarah, do you want to save your marriage?" The question surprised me. Only 2 weeks earlier, my answer would have been immediate. "Now, I don't know." She nodded. "That's actually an honest answer." She explained custody laws, property division, retirement accounts, mediation, timelines. The conversation felt surreal. For 18 years, we had built a life together. Now strangers would divide it into legal categories: assets, liabilities, shared property, parenting schedules. How could an entire marriage fit inside paperwork? Mark called that evening. "I met with Rachel," he admitted. I stayed silent. "It's over." Still silence. "I realized I destroyed everything." "You destroyed trust," I answered quietly. "That's harder to rebuild. I'll spend the rest of my life trying." His voice cracked. "I know you probably hate me. I don't hate you." Another pause. "I just don't recognize you anymore." He didn't have an answer. Neither of us did. Life settled into painful routines. Emma spent weekdays with me. She visited Mark every other weekend. The first time she packed an overnight bag, my heart shattered all over again. This wasn't supposed to be our story. Mark tried desperately to become the father he should have been all along. He attended every volleyball game, every parent conference, every doctor's appointment. He never missed his weekends. Maybe guilt made him more present. Maybe losing his family finally showed him what mattered. But timing has a cruel sense of humor. Sometimes people become the version you always needed. Only after it's too late. Thanksgiving approached. For the first time in nearly 20 years, we celebrated separately. Emma insisted on spending lunch with me and dinner with Mark. I agreed. When she left that afternoon carrying pumpkin pie wrapped in foil, the house became painfully quiet. I wandered through the kitchen. Every cabinet, every chair, every family photo reminded me of holidays that would never happen again. I expected loneliness. Instead, I felt relief. Not because I enjoyed being alone, because I no longer had to wonder where my husband wanted to be. Truth, however painful, is easier to live with than uncertainty. December arrived with the season's first snowfall. One Saturday morning, Emma and I decorated the Christmas tree ourselves. She laughed as we argued over which ornaments belonged in front. Christmas music filled the living room. For the first time in months, our house sounded alive again. Halfway through hanging lights, the doorbell rang. Mark stood outside holding 2 storage boxes. I found these in the attic. Inside were dozens of old family photo albums. Emma immediately sat on the floor flipping through them. There we were, our honeymoon. Emma's first birthday, camping trips, Christmas mornings, beach vacations, entire years preserved inside fading photographs. Mark stared at them quietly. I don't understand how I could risk all of this. I finally answered the question he'd been asking himself for weeks. Because you stopped appreciating ordinary happiness. He lowered his eyes. I think you're right. Later that night, after Emma went upstairs, Mark stood near the front door. I know I don't deserve another chance. No, I know. But if there is even 1%, I interrupted him gently. You're asking the wrong question. He looked confused. The question isn't whether I could forgive you. He frowned. It's whether I could ever trust you again. Silence filled the hallway. He already knew the answer. Slowly, he nodded. I understand. For the first time since all of this began. He truly did. The confrontation left the house feeling unfamiliar, as though every room had absorbed the words we had thrown at each other. Mark moved into a furnished apartment across town the following Monday. He said it was temporary. Neither of us believed it. The first week after he left was the hardest. Not because I missed the arguments, because silence has a way of forcing you to hear your own thoughts. Every morning I still reached for 2 coffee mugs before remembering there was only one person drinking coffee in this house now. Every evening I caught myself listening for his truck pulling into the driveway. Old habits don't disappear overnight. Emma struggled more than either of us expected. She tried to act mature. She insisted she understood. But I noticed the little things. Her bedroom door stayed closed longer. Her grades slipped. The music in her headphones became louder. One Saturday afternoon, she finally broke. We were folding laundry together, when she suddenly dropped one of her sweaters onto the floor. Did Dad stop loving us? The question hit harder than anything Mark had ever said. I pulled her into my arms immediately. No, I whispered. He made terrible choices. But those choices are not because of you. She cried against my shoulder for nearly 20 minutes. I held her the same way I had when she was 5 years old after nightmares. Some kinds of comfort never change. Meanwhile, Mark kept trying. Flowers appeared on the porch. Texts arrived every morning. I'm sorry. I miss you. Can we talk? I'll do anything. Months earlier, I would have clung to those messages. Now they only made me tired. Apologies are easy after consequences arrive. Character shows itself before consequences. Therapy became my safe place. Every Wednesday evening, I sat across from Dr. Helen Brooks, a woman in her 60s whose office smelled faintly of lavender tea and old books. One afternoon, she asked me something unexpected. When did you stop being Sarah? I frowned. I don't understand. She smiled gently. You've spent every session talking about being Mark's wife. Emma's mother, the manager of the household, the peacekeeper. But who were you before all of that? The question stayed with me all week. Who was I? Before marriage? Before motherhood? Before routines replaced dreams? Who had I been? I wasn't sure anymore. And realizing that hurt almost as much as the betrayal. Little by little, I started reclaiming pieces of myself. I accepted a permanent teaching position instead of substitute work. I joined a Saturday photography class, something I had wanted to do since my 20s. The first morning we met before sunrise near Lake Michigan. Cold wind swept across the water while the sky slowly turned pink. Our instructor spoke about patience. You don't chase beautiful light, he said. You wait for it. Standing there with a camera in my hands, I realized healing worked exactly the same way. You couldn't force it. You simply had to stay long enough for it to arrive. Mark continued asking for another chance. One evening after Emma's volleyball game, he approached me outside the gym. The parking lot lights reflected off wet pavement after an afternoon rain. He looked exhausted. Dark circles surrounded his eyes. I ended everything with Rachel. I looked at him calmly. I know. His eyebrows lifted. You know? People talk. He nodded slowly. It didn't mean anything compared to what we had. I didn't answer. Instead, I asked the question that had been living inside me for weeks. If I hadn't heard that phone call, would you have told me? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. That silence answered everything. Rachel disappeared from our lives almost completely. Later, I learned that she had accepted a consulting job in Seattle. She and Mark hadn't lasted another month. Apparently, reality looked very different. From stolen conversations and nostalgic reunions, affairs often survive only in fantasy. Real life demands much more. Winter settled over Chicago. Snow covered the sidewalks. Christmas approached. For the first time in 18 years, we celebrated separately. Emma spent Christmas Eve with me. Christmas Day with Mark. Watching her pack an overnight bag that morning nearly broke my heart. Children should never have to divide holidays. But she handled it with more grace than either of her parents. When she returned the next evening, she hugged me tightly. I like it here better. I kissed her forehead. You don't have to choose. She smiled sadly. I already did. Several weeks later, the divorce papers were finalized. No dramatic courtroom battle. No screaming. No revenge. Just signatures. Black ink ending 18 years of marriage. The judge wished us both well. Mark quietly thanked him. I simply nodded. Walking out of the courthouse into the freezing January air, I expected to feel devastated. Instead, I felt strangely light, as though I had been carrying something impossibly heavy for years without realizing it. That evening, I returned home alone. The house was quiet. Snowflakes drifted outside the windows. I made myself hot chocolate instead of wine. I wrapped myself in a blanket. And for the first time in months, I slept peacefully. Not because life had become easy, because uncertainty had finally ended. Sometimes certainty hurts less than hope. Spring arrived quietly. The snow melted from the sidewalks, revealing patches of green grass that had survived beneath the ice all winter. The neighborhood slowly came back to life. Children rode bicycles again. Neighbors lingered outside, talking across fences. Flowers appeared in gardens that had seemed lifeless only weeks before. Healing, I realized, looked very much the same. It wasn't dramatic. It happened little by little, one ordinary day at a time. Emma changed too. She smiled more often. Her grades recovered. She even convinced me to repaint her bedroom together. We spent an entire Saturday covered in pale blue paint, laughing every time one of us accidentally splattered the other. For the first time in months, our laughter sounded effortless. Not forced. Not polite. Real. That evening, while we ordered pizza and sat on the living room floor because the furniture hadn't been moved back yet, Emma looked at me thoughtfully. You know, what? I think we're going to be okay. I smiled. I think you're right. Mark remained present in Emma's life. He never missed his parenting weekends. He attended every volleyball match, every school performance, every birthday. He became the father he always should have been. But he was no longer my husband. One afternoon, he stopped by to return one of Emma's jackets. As he stood on the porch, he looked around the house. You changed the flowers. I did. The place feels different. So do I. He smiled sadly. I can see that. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, I've spent months trying to understand where everything went wrong. I looked at him calmly. It didn't happen all at once. He nodded. I know. It happened every time we chose routine instead of connection. Every conversation we postponed. Every feeling we ignored. Every moment we assumed there would always be tomorrow. He lowered his eyes. I wish I'd realized that sooner. So do I. Later that summer, my photography class organized an exhibition. Nothing fancy. Just local artists displaying their work in a small community gallery. I almost didn't participate. Then Emma insisted. You've worked too hard not to. One of my photographs showed sunrise over Lake Michigan. Soft golden light reflecting across perfectly still water. A small handwritten card beneath it carried the title, New Beginnings. A woman stopped in front of it for several minutes. Then she smiled at me. This picture feels peaceful. I thanked her. She had no idea that the photograph represented far more than a sunrise. It represented survival. Months passed. Life continued. One crisp October afternoon, almost exactly a year after everything fell apart, I found myself driving through our old neighborhood. Not because I missed it. Because I happened to be nearby after a school event. I slowed as I passed the old cul-de-sac. The maple tree in front of the house had turned brilliant shades of red and orange. For just a second, I remembered the night I had slammed that front door. The anger. The fear. The heartbreak. Then I remembered something else. Walking back through the garage. Holding that old baby monitor. Hearing the truth that changed my life forever. At the time, I believed it was the worst moment I would ever experience. Looking back, it was the moment that finally set me free. That evening, Emma and I ate dinner on the back porch. The air carried the familiar scent of autumn leaves. The same season, a completely different life. She looked over at me. Mom? Yeah? Do you ever wish none of it had happened? I thought carefully before answering. I wish your father had made different choices. She nodded. But if none of it had happened? I looked toward the sunset stretching across the sky. I might still be living a life where I had forgotten who I was. She smiled softly. I like who you are now. Tears filled my eyes. So do I. People often ask whether I ever forgave Mark. The answer surprises them. Yes, eventually I did. Not because he earned it. Not because forgetting was possible. But because forgiveness isn't something you give another person. It's something you give yourself. Resentment keeps you tied to the moment that hurt you. Forgiveness allows you to walk away from it. What I never did was go back. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. They're meant to remind us how far we've come. Looking back now, I no longer think of the baby monitor as the device that exposed my husband's betrayal. I think of it as the moment I finally started listening. Not to him, to myself. Sometimes life whispers that something is wrong long before it starts shouting. The real lesson wasn't that my husband cheated. It was that I ignored my own instincts for far too long because I was afraid of what the truth might cost. Ironically, the truth didn't destroy my life. It gave me a chance to build a better one. If this story reminds you of something you're living through today, don't ignore your own voice. Ask the difficult questions. Protect your dignity. And remember that starting over isn't the end of your story. Sometimes it's finally the beginning. Thank you for listening. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever experienced a moment when the truth changed everything? Share your story in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories of resilience, hope, and second chances. Until next time, take care of yourself and never underestimate the quiet strength that lives inside you.